Hey everyone, welcome into our TV5 digital studio. We have something new and exciting for you this morning. We are talking about After the Story. It's one of our new episodes of one of our new podcasts, and so you see obviously special reports in our newscasts, and this is kind of a follow-up, a more in-depth follow-up. So, you can only get into certain topics in these stories that you see in our newscasts, a minute 30, 2 minutes max. So we're really excited to dive in deep. And I have a very special guest with us this morning. We have a former TV5 News reporter and anchor. It's Barb Hanley Miller. And Barb, I appreciate you coming in this morning. How are you?
I'm doing well, Blake. It's great to be here.
Yeah. How did it feel walking into old TV5?
Well, it feels like home, but with a twist. Things
Yeah.
look a little different, I left here in December 1988. I was news director in my last 2.5 years here, and so it looks a little different, but it's still the mothership.
Yeah, I love that word you use,
Yeah.
mothership.
Yep.
So tell us a little bit about what you've been up to since you left.
I left Channel 5 and I went to graduate school at CMU. I had been guest speaking in classes in journalism and broadcast journalism at CMU, and I found I really liked the classroom. And I had just been married and had a family and wanted to expand that family. And I thought, you know what? I'm working so much as news director. I was here a whole lot of hours. And so I just thought teaching might be a little bit gentler life.
Yeah.
And so I transitioned to teaching, some at Central Michigan. In fact, fun detail is that Katie O'Mara was a student of mine at CMU,
Really?
Former news anchor here, when we put on a daily student newscast. And so I was kind of like the executive producer as a graduate assistant, and Katie was one of my students. I could see her talent then, and, it was great when she came back to Channel 5. She came in, then I started teaching broadcasting at Delta College eventually, and then the last 20 years I've been teaching. I had a stint teaching 10 years at Northwood University, and then at Delta College the last 20 years or so. I 3 years right after I got my graduate degree, and then after Northwood I went back to Delta for 17 years, and I retired in 2019. So I had some of those folks that I worked with here as guest lecturers in my classes, and running into them in the community, a lot of people that I hired or that I worked with. So, I still feel very much a Channel 5 alumni.
I think I'm in great presence right now.
I don't know about that, but it's good to see you, and it's good to see the next generation.
Yeah.
You are doing the job that I was hired to do at 23 years old, a year out of Michigan State, that I did the cut-ins in the newscast, the Today Show then. We were an NBC affiliate, of course, and then the noon news, also a 6 o'clock half hour. So, you have to have a strong work ethic. You come in and boom. I was going out to Indiantown at that time at 4:30 in the morning, listening to Larry King on the way, trying to wake up my brain.
Yes. We're a different breed. Us
Yes.
That we get up early.
No kidding.
Yeah.
You have to. It kind of puts a killer on your social life on Friday nights, right?
Yeah,
Like,
you passed out of the couch
yeah,
at 6 p.m.
It's 10 o'clock. I'm sorry, you have to take me home. Yeah.
I've been there way too often,
Yeah.
Barb. Way too often.
Yeah, that's when you got to take a nap later, right? Yeah. Get ready for your social life.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. Congratulations on the retirement.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
You helped shape the next generation too for a while. So
I'm proud of that. Yes, there's a lot of alumni that I worked with and that I hired that made a big impact here at Channel 5.
Yeah.
From Allison Payne to Jay Brando to Eric Gila, Brian Wood, I could name a lot more. And then just the pleasure of working with the whole team here. It was the 80s were a real heyday, I have to tell you, that we were owned by Meredith Corporation. We had a 65% news share at 6 o'clock, so we were so dominant. And of course, then CNN came in and so many more choices. for viewers. But Channel 5 is still, dominant news leader.
That's
so
right.
It's good to see you guys are carrying the torch.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We're trying. We're definitely trying. So, of course, this episode of our podcast is dubbed After the Story. So you might recall last week we did a series of reports on the Clear County murders of 1982, Robert Lee Haggart, the main suspect, the murder trial. It was really one of the first reports I've really set my teeth or sunk my teeth into in terms of requesting old records, finding old video, talking to people who were around at the time. And of course, it is history what happened. It's unfortunate what happened. I feel for those who have been impacted, and can't even imagine going through something like that. But, I want to hear from your perspective. You were here at the time, 1982. Just tell our listeners what role you were in at first when the news broke, and what was that atmosphere like?
I was in 1982. I was still doing the noon news. So, the crew that was able to get that video from the gruesome murder, Tom Knob and Gary Lankowski, I think were the two videographers that were out there, if I remember correctly. Tom for sure, I think Gary too. And, so we were able to get that for the morning news and for the noon news the next day too. And it was just unfathomable, as you said. The number of family members that were killed and the horror of children and just the unspeakable number of victims and wiping out almost an entire family, with the exception of a 1-year-old child, that her mother was able to throw herself over the baby. So, just the gruesomeness of it is a tough thing. Everybody thinks that anybody who's a news reporter has this really tough veneer, but that's just not true. The people that I worked with here at Channel 5 during that time, and I think it's true of news reporters in general, I have a deep empathy for them, that it's hard to absorb that, whether you're on the scene or whether you're a part of those follow-up stories day after day or week after week, because it continues from the time of that gruesome homicide all the way through the trial. And I covered some of the trial as well, and so there wasn't a single reporter who covered the entire trial.
Right.
But I did go several days to it in Midland Circuit Court. Pinky Wilson was the defense attorney court appointed for Haggart, and Norm Donker was the prosecutor. And I thought it was great that you followed up with him on his thoughts looking back, and it brought back a lot of memories of sitting in that courtroom and Haggart just kind of staring ahead stoically. Obviously they didn't put him on the stand. It wouldn't have been to their benefit whatsoever. Right. So you never heard from him. But I was always drawn as a reporter to covering trials in general. I thought it was interesting. I saw very much the bid for justice for families, for victims, and I was just drawn to the newsworthiness of it. So I was privileged to be able to cover part of that trial. And then I was, of course, covering updates for the noon news every day, because I was the noon anchor at that time. So, and then Haggart, of course, he didn't take the stand. He didn't talk to reporters. We never had any sound from him at all, not even when he was walking in or out. The famous perpetrator's walk, right? You're trying to get sound there, too. But we never got a peep out of him. And then about summer of 1984, May or so, he started calling me here in the newsroom. We're sitting steps away from what was my old desk then.
Right.
And he just started calling collect from, at that point, he was out of Jackson. He went to Jackson first and then up to Marquette State Prison to serve his sentence. And he started calling me collect here. And it turned out that during the time he was in Midland, he was watching, a lot of the news coverage. And I don't, and he saw me in court, obviously, because I covered it, and then he probably saw my stories of the coverage, you know.
Right.
So he started calling me for whatever reason, collect, and I thought, why am I taking this call from this guy? But at the same time, there was one more appeal that was coming up. He had been convicted, seven life sentences, no parole, of course, but there was an appeal to the state appeals court, and so I think he was trying to maybe generate a little bit of I don't know what, but there was no way I would diverge at all from the point that he was very guilty of murdering 7 people. But there was a story to be told, I think, of what his life was like up in Marquette State Prison. So I took his calls, and we eventually, in June of 1984, while his appeal was still out there, went up to Marquette State Prison and did an interview.
Wow. And just to think that he was calling you.
Yeah.
I mean, I just want to know in general, because this is such a sensitive case.
Right.
And controversial. Is it hard for you to stick to the duty of journalism and deal with all the immense emotions that you're feeling just as a human being?
Absolutely. Absolutely it is. As I said, I mean, I remember standing in the newsroom when the Shuttle Challenger blew up in real time in 1986, and we were all in tears. And you can't inure yourself to the pain when you're out in the field of the emotions that you're feeling when these kinds of gruesome things happen, or when you see injustice happening in a court trial, or when any number of those things. We're human beings, and we are reporters in a role, but we are human beings first. And I think if you're any amount of a good person, and I think everyone I worked with here was, so you can't block yourself off from that pain. But I guess what bothered me was this guy has been convicted of 7 life sentences. I'm living alone in Saginaw Township at the time.
Yeah.
I'm 25 years old, and he has nothing to lose from getting out in a garbage can or something, because what are they going to give him? Another life sentence if he escapes, you know? So, I mean, sort of...
obviously, he was familiar with you.
Absolutely. And I don't know how good of a sleuth he would have been finding where I lived, but, it wasn't listed or anything. But people can ask around, and you can find out, So I always worried a little bit about him showing up at my doorstep, because, anyone who's been on the air, and particularly, I think, a woman, has strange things that happen. Let's put it that way.
It's the nicest way to put it.
Yeah, I covered the Midland nuclear plant for a long time, and the demise of the construction of the nuclear plant with all the problems. And there were some people that were not happy with our coverage because they wanted to see that go forward and all the jobs associated with it. And so I had quite a few threats. For a while, I had a police officer. I was living in Bay City at that point, and I had a police officer that was outside my apartment building, apartment house, for several days because of the nature of the threats. And then you're getting weird letters all the time from viewers. One guy wrote to me about a 3-page letter that is my favorite, actually, that I did save because it's so funny that he's writing for 3 pages about how he wants me to cut my hair. This gentleman, bless his heart, was probably intellectually disabled or intellectually challenged. He was from the Saginaw Valley Rehab Institute, which was, I think, kind of a foster care facility.
Okay.
So he was writing, I saw the movie Cage the Young Woman of Prison. And in that movie, they shaved all the girls' hair off. And that's what I want you to do. I want you to shave it in a short shingle around your ear and around the back and over the top of your head. And this guy goes on for like 3 pages. I mean... Just
about your hair.
Yeah, just about my hair, how he wants me to shave my head. So you get enough of that kind of stuff that when you start talking to a guy who is Michigan's 3rd mass murder, you don't want to shy away from it because you see the news value, but it does make you a little circumspect, like, I'm living alone, and kind of figuring out a plan were he to show up at your doorstep.
Right.
Yeah.
That's such a surreal thought that I thankfully haven't come across myself yet.
Good.
Yet. I say that because I
Yeah.
know a lot of other journalists who, do run into that still to this day.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Anybody that's on the air.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And you sure don't want to invite that kind of thing, but it just, there's a lot of diversity in the folks that we're broadcasting to.
That's right.
Yeah.
So you made the trip up north to the prison where Haggart was jailed, and just run me through that, because I'm certainly envious only in the fact that when we really want sound from people who we think will make a difference in a story, we really want that. Don't always get it though. So you said at first he didn't make a peep. 2 years later, he's an open book?
No, he definitely wasn't an open book. He called me and he said, I want to talk to you. And I said, what are we going to talk about? He said, I can't talk a lot about the case because of my appeal.
Yeah.
But I can talk to you, and I can talk to you about my life up here. And I thought, okay, is there enough news value in this? Because I certainly don't want to be a part of promoting, this guy's agenda or glorifying a mass murder. And I was absolutely sensitive to the family's concerns about that.
Yeah.
So I spoke with, again, I was a reporter and anchor then, spoke to the news director about it, and he saw value in it. So Tom Knaubt, it was literally like a one-day notice kind of thing that I had done the noon news. I think I had covered, by that time I was doing the noon news and field reporting in the afternoon. They had someone else doing the early morning cut-ins. Yeah. So I had a story to do in the afternoon. We did that, and then Tom Knaubt and I jumped in a news vehicle and headed up to the UP. I mean, it's a 6-hour drive to Marquette, right? So we drive up there, and we get to this little town. I don't even know what town it was. It's dark. It's like 10:30 at night, and we were out of gas. And we didn't think it would be a problem to find gas, but it's the UP, and they close these businesses down. I mean, around here, right, you're going to find a place open.
Right.
And so that was stupid on our part, but I remember we pulled into this little town, and we found where the police department was and said, we're out of gas and we're on our way up north to Marquette State Prison. So a sheriff's deputy went into the bar to get the guy out who owned the gas station.
Yeah.
So that he could help us get gas and we could be on our way. So there was that. I remembered that. And then we got up north. We got to Marquette and stayed in a hotel. And the next morning, we had to go through security at Marquette State Prison, and we weren't 100% sure that they were even going to let us do the interview. We were going up there with like the initial clearance, but not the final clearance.
Okay.
Because it wasn't very commonplace.
Right.
And now they would never allow us to do it. They would never allow that. No. But the warden did allow it, and he did get initial clearance from the state higher ups, so enough that it was worth going up there. So we had to go through security, be searched, and all of that, of course. And then they put us in a room that was about half the size of this little studio, very small. It was basically a broom closet off the visitors area.
Okay.
And it was just a place with enough room for Tom to set up his tripod, his camera, and for us to sit at a small table. And I thought it was interesting because we closed the door so that we would get better audio, and there's no guard or anything in there. And I'm like, this guy doesn't like what I have to say. I mean, it was strange to me because I thought that there would be maybe a guard hovering at the door or something, but there wasn't.
Yeah, especially given the person you're trying to talk to.
Right. But I mean, I wasn't... I was a little nervous because I wanted to get some news value out of it, but I wasn't really nervous being around him because I wanted what we were there for, so I wasn't asking to put a guard in it or anything like that.
Yeah.
So we talked to him for probably 45 minutes or an hour, something like that. Did the raw interview, and then I did 2 segments that aired in June 1984 and aired here locally, and then the NBC network was wanted the feed as well. So the second day that the segment aired, we also sent it on to the NBC News feed. So it was significant, I think, in the sense that you got an idea of what his life was like up there.
Okay.
And that was both newsworthy, and it enraged some people viewing it. And
right. Yeah, what was that reaction like from viewers?
Yeah.
Did you get a lot of flack?
I don't think it was a significant amount, but I do remember some, and mainly it was that why give this guy any airtime at all?
Right.
But many, many others thought it was interesting to see him, because they had never seen him on the stand, and to better understand, who this guy was a little bit, and what life is like inside a max no parole prison.
Right.
So that was the newsworthiness that I saw as a reporter, and I think it bore out. I think it definitely in retrospect was worth doing.
Anything you can recall from the interview that surprised you about his life up there, or?
What surprised me, Blake, was that even though I knew that prisoners got yard time, the video segment that kind of, I guess, bothered me too, was the fact that they had a softball team and they were playing softball, and you had guys like, I remember spotting John Norman Collins, who was another famous, notorious, I should say, not famous, murderer who killed nurses in the Ann Arbor area in the 70s. And so there was kind of a who's who of multiple murder convicts,
Yeah.
And it just was disconcerting, to see them. It was kind of a piece of video that showed that even in that milieu, they could have some areas of enjoyment. And I'm not any supporter of an inmate having to do hard time. I think they should all be put to work in the prison, but it just, I don't know, I was like, this guy killed 7 people, he should not be on a softball team.
Right.
That bothered me, and I showed it because I thought it was important for people to know that was a part of it. But I also know from having spent time in prisons, and I actually taught in the Freeland Correctional Facility a couple years ago as part of Delta College. They help, which is a great program when you know that people are going to come out of prison, and these were minimum security prisoners who were going to get out within the next few years, and they showed the intellectual aptitude for college courses. So if you know they're going to get out, are they going to be a better contributing citizen when they have an associate's degree in business and have a greater chance of employability?
Right.
So yeah, I totally support that. Or GEDs, people being able to make something better of themselves. So I don't want to give the wrong impression. But again, these were mass murderers playing softball.
It's not what you would expect when you, walked into the prison.
Right, exactly. And I thought it was interesting to see some of the things that Haggart said off camera. I remember a lot. And then he also wrote to me for about another year and a half after that, even though I didn't respond at all. He had...
I'm glad you brought those.
I brought one, but I mean, I've got a whole stack of these, and I just saved them for, I don't know why, but this is 3, 4, 5 pages worth of, what's going on at the prison, and a light ask for, could you follow up for me? He was trying to get me to bite at some point to help him, and I wasn't going to help him. There was a grievance that he felt was wrong because he put up paper over his locker. They each had like a locker. He was in a single cell at the end of a long hall of cells up at Marquette. And he put paper over the vents in his locker because he was trying to keep bugs from coming into his cell. And they saw it as a fire hazard and a grievance, so they took his job away. And then he's talking about, in this particular letter, which is October 16th, 1984, he's talking about the fact that the prison may riot They didn't. There was a riot
Yeah.
at Jackson, but they didn't riot up at Marquette. But that he could like feel the rumble that might happen because some guy that worked in the kitchen had found bugs in the food and had leaked that to a reporter, and the prison officials were very upset at that, so they were cracking down, and they were taking away cement blocks that each of them had in their cells to like create bookshelves, and they decided it was too these pieces were something they could pick up and possibly throw, so they were taking those out. They were giving everyone a wood board that they could use for a bookshelf. I don't understand how that would be helpful, but that's what he said in the letter, and he was making fun with the prison guards in this letter, he said, saying, it's ridiculous. They take away a cement block but give us a wood board that I can easily cut up over time and whittle into a weapon, and I could shiv you. And the prison guards said, great, then I get a chance to shoot and kill you.
Right.
So I mean, they were just kind of playing around with stuff like that. So there was also, I think, I have no idea why he wrote me, but
And you didn't respond once.
no, I never responded. And he always told me, I mean, you're going up to interview a guy that has committed 7 murders. You're going to be serious. Normally, if I'm going to interview, the president of the chamber, or I'm going to interview anybody that's in a situation that is news breaking, but you have time to have a little bit of chit chat about small talk beforehand, you're gonna make an effort. Icebreaker, exactly. But with this guy, I wasn't gonna chat him up like, how are you? I hope they're treating you well up here. No, I mean, I was all
Sleeping
business.
good?
Yeah, exactly. So I was all business, and as a result, most of his letters are like, dear gray hair, because he said, you're going to sport gray hair, you're so intense. Or at the end, he'd say, in this one, something like, you should smile even more because you have a beautiful smile, that kind of thing. And I'm like, no. I don't need that feedback from you, dude.
Right,
I
dude.
really don't. And in this letter, another thing that's very telling, I didn't go back and reread all of them, but I read one of them. And in this letter, he also was saying how they had taken away their privileges to wear like a robe or a shirt before they went into the shower. And it bothered him that they had to walk naked into the shower area past a bunch of guards and that kind of thing, that he felt they should have that privacy. And he said something like, they're asking me to lose my morals by walking around naked. And I'm like, really? You are disassociating so much. Your morals were lost a long time ago when you murdered 7 people, but I thought it was really, he really did distance himself from what he committed. He never admitted his guilt in those murders. I know there was a freelance journalist who befriended him again in jail somehow and said that he had a confession from Haggart in the murder of Doris Arndt, and that happened, sometime after he was out on probation and before he killed, the Post family. So. That's interesting, but he never, in this case, even after appeals, never said anything on the record about it. So I wasn't going to get that out of him.
Right.
But I think that he was kind of a poster child for the death penalty almost, that Michigan is a no death penalty state, always has been, except in federal cases, because if you commit murder on federal land, the Indian reservation or any federal facility, then you can be subject to the death penalty in Michigan. But we've always been a death penalty state. But he said, Judge Tyrone Gillespie gave me 7 sentences. But let's be real. I mean, he was like cocky when he said this. Let's be real. I am serving only 1 life sentence. And he did, of course, only serve 20 years, and he died in prison at 53. At the time I interviewed him, he was 34, I was 25, and he just came across really cocky, almost when I looked back at that interview in the last day, because I had it on DVD saved. it really struck me as his eyes were almost flirtatious, which really disgusted me, you know. To me, because he was like, what do you want me to say? What do you want me to say? You know, and I'm like, I don't want you to say anything. Just tell the truth.
Right.
You know, but that tone was repeated in these letters, you know, and some inappropriate things he wrote. So
Yeah.
it's just, he said, the judge called me Attila the Hun, you know, so that speaks for itself. He talked about prison life, and there's kind of a, as you would expect, almost a pecking order based on a perversity that is, you have respect because you're in here for 7 sentences. I'm only in here for 1, life in prison, no parole. Pretty sick, huh? But I think he felt like they aren't going to really touch me because they know that I'm a bad guy who killed 7 people. But at the same time, he killed children. And there's also a thing in prison that when you have hurt children, many, many guys want to do harm to you.
Yeah.
And he was in a single cell. He didn't have a roommate, a cell bunk mate. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why, is that even though he got general yard time, he could be watched, but I don't think they wanted him in a shared cell. When you have killed children, you know, you're a target.
Right.
And it's understandable.
You know, the corrections officer I spoke with who, you know, spent some time with Haggart himself just by being positioned up in Kinross.
Yes.
You know, he, just going back to your flirtatiousness that he would give off, he said the same thing, like when he was in court, the corrections officer saying this about Haggart, you know, looking back and seeing all the beautiful women, like fantasizing over him. So yeah, and then I heard that he thought he was smarter than everybody in prison, and
yeah, exactly.
It's funny how things line up with all these different perspectives that we've been seeking.
On the interview that I did with him, he said, I am number 141523, and I'm just trying to do my time. I don't want to get caught up in the whole prison rhubarb. I'm just trying to do my time. And he didn't have, at that point, he had been in prison for 2 years, and I, of course, interviewed the warden to give perspective and started both segments with the fact, all the original footage, and the fact that he obviously was guilty of these murders. There was no question of an appeal being possible, really. It was just a procedural thing. But explaining why we were going to Marquette to get this look inside the prison. And, you know, but he said, I want to become a Jew because if I am Jewish, then I get out of my cell twice at night to be able to go to services.
Right.
So
it seems like a lot of con.
Yes, a lot of con in that con man, right? And he didn't look troubled whatsoever. I mean, he was grinning through half the interview, or, you know, trying to get me to loosen up.
Yeah.
And I'm like, nope, we're moving on. Here's the next question. Here's the next question, and I got another one for you too. But he said, I said, how do you spend your day? Well, I wake up, I go to chow, I do crossword puzzles a lot, I watch the news, I read, I write letters. So I wonder how many women he was writing letters to, hoping that one, certainly wasn't going to be me, but hoping one would, you know.
Help him out?
Yes, yeah. Take on his case and do some maneuvering for him from the outside.
Wow.
Yeah, because he felt he was being treated unfairly as a prisoner. So he wanted, I think, somebody not necessarily to go on the air with it, but to talk to his outside attorney. His, you know, he still had a court-appointed attorney or something because he was referring to his attorney. I don't know why he still would, but anyway, it just, you know, I do crossword puzzles. I write letters. I participate in exercise as I can, and that's when we're showing the video of them playing softball. Yeah. And I'm like, first of all, these guys have bats. What's to stop them from turning around when you make me mad with the way you threw that ball and just clubbing them, because they're serving life sentences.
It's really interesting to see that, isn't it?
And he was upset that they wouldn't allow the maximum security lifers to play ball with the more minimum. They had both in that prison, but they kept them completely separated. And they wouldn't allow them to be, in the cafeteria at the same time. They wouldn't allow them in the yard at the same time. So he wanted those guys to be able to play softball so they could create the best of the best team, like an MVP softball team.
Yeah.
And was mad that the warden wouldn't allow them, to mix those guys. But they didn't want minimum security prisoners in with them.
Right.
I mean, so
It just doesn't mesh.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, just surreal to hear it like firsthand experience, especially because, I was born after the 80s. So, this was such a different deep dive for me because I'm looking back on, things I wasn't around for, and hearing it from
Right.
people who actually were, I think is just, I don't know the right word for it, but I'm very grateful to have you here and explain your perspective and experience.
It was a team effort, that's for sure. I mean, Tom Knop and I did that interview, but everybody that was in the newsroom had a piece of that story at some point.
Yeah.
So there was just a lot of coverage over those 2 years until his appeals were. I don't believe there was a story done after that. After ours, there just wasn't a reason to.
Yeah.
Go do your time. That's where you are. And we did hear from some viewers who were like, why are you putting this guy in the air? But I think if they saw the segment, if they really looked at it, it did show, as I said, something in the story along the lines of it's hard to convey the fog of desperation that pervades this place.
Yeah.
I mean, I had never been to Marquette Prison, and it's an extremely Gothic architecture. I think it was built in the early 1900s,
Wow.
and it's very Gothic looking. And the place was very old school, and it just, the rest of your life in prison, no parole. You're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
So I don't know what is a in my mind, sometimes I think that's a harder way to have to compensate for the lives that you took. But it was, I did put some thought into looking back on this when I started teaching at the Freeland Correctional Facility. But a very, very different situation because these guys all had good time, good behavior, intellectual aptitude. They were getting out within 2 years. That
Okay.
was the rule. And that program exists today, even through the pandemic. It's continued, which is remarkable.
Absolutely.
And I think educational opportunities for inmates who are going to get out like that are a very good idea. Because, again, they're going to be, those guys would say to me, I would say when you're out in the community, and they would say, just say returned citizens. Like that's the way they wanted to be thought of. And I hope those guys that I worked with, who now are graduated, I went to their graduation, that they're doing well and
Yeah.
that they are truly returned citizens. So that wasn't going to be Haggard. He was never going to be a returned citizen unless he escaped. And thankfully, as far as I know, he never had an attempt.
No,
Yeah.
I think he kind of knew. And then I know that also and you might have saw this in our reports, the corrections officer I talked to said that he had hepatitis C, and which he eventually died from in
Right,
prison in
right.
2003. So, and that corrections officer said, you know what, I think that might be your punishment rather than staying in prison.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. Well, once in a while, I would, during the years, especially after that, I would check Otis, to see the state system that you can look up inmates to
Yeah.
see if Haggart was still there, if he was moved from Marquette, if he was still alive, because you weren't hearing things about him. I just kind of wanted to know if he was still there. Again, thinking, I don't want this guy just showing up and looking for me.
Right.
So it was interesting to kind of track him. So I saw, pictures of him then when he was much older in his 50s, so.
could you tell like if he was sick at all in the pictures?
No.
Just curious.
Not really, no. So I think that when these kind of stories occur, you've got to, I think you did a really good job following up. on, legitimate leads.
Thank
I
you.
hope that Amanda Gaffney, who may have a different name, may be married now, the little 1-year-old girl who survived that, I really hope she's doing well.
Me too.
Sounds like she had great grandparents on her father's side. Her mother was killed, but her on her father's side, her grandparents were very involved. It sounded like in her upbringing too. So that's really good.
Good.
Yeah.
Barb, I'm just blown away by all the knowledge you brought here today and experiences, and I want to thank you for coming on this first
great to be with
episode
you.
of After the Story. Great to be with you too, and I can only hope I follow in your footsteps.
You're doing exactly the job I had at 23.
Noon
And you're
Anchors
doing
Unite.
it. Yeah, exactly. It's a great starting place, Blake. And I don't even want to say starting place. It's a great place to be, period, because you have a real responsibility to your viewers, and it's a privilege, to
Absolutely.
do that every day. So
And I don't want anyone to ever think we take that for granted, because we don't.
I know you don't. Yeah, you do a great job.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, for those of us listening, you can find more episodes coming soon. We're here in our TV5 digital studio. After the Story is found on our website, WNEM.com, or on our YouTube page.